Hi, Bob the Canadian here. During this past weekend's live English lesson, someone asked again if I could tell more stories about my life. So I thought this would be a great time to do another video where I tell you two stories, but where only one story is true and the other story is a lie. So stick around. This will be a great little English lesson where you will have some great English listening practice. And I will tell you at the end which of the two stories was true. Hi, Bob the Canadian here. Welcome to this little English lesson. If you are new here, you should click that little red subscribe button down there and give me a thumbs up at some point during this video if it helps you learn just a little bit of English. So I'm going to tell you two stories. As I tell those two stories, I'm going to try and tell you when it happened, where it happened, who it happened with, what happened during the story, and then how it ended. And that is a great structure that you can use when you tell stories yourself. But let's get to the first story. When I was a little kid, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mom and I went to the local grocery store. And we went up and down the aisles of the grocery store, and we got to the snack aisle. And in the snack aisle, they had all kinds of pop or soda, and they had all kinds of potato chips. And there was a certain kind of potato chip that I really liked, and I asked my mom if she could buy it for me, and she said no. She said that I couldn't have those potato chips. So as we went to the next aisle in the store, I kind of walked backwards into the previous aisle, and I went back to the chips that I liked, the potato chips I liked, and I secretly opened the bag in the store without paying for them, and I started eating them. No sooner had I eaten a few chips and my mom was standing over me, and what she did I will remember for my whole life. We took the chips to the front of the store and she made me apologize to the store manager. Then she put the chips in our grocery cart and we went through the checkout and we bought the chips, and then we took the chips home and she threw them in the garbage and she made me pay for the chips with my own money. So that was story number one. I'm not going to tell you if that story was true or not. Instead, I'm going to tell you story number two, which you might find is eerily similar to story number one. So here we go. When I was a kid, about 9 or 10 years old, my mom and I went to the grocery store to buy groceries. Does this sound familiar? While we were at the grocery store, we went up and down the aisles until we got to the aisle where they had Coke. And I really like Coca-Cola. It is one of my favorite soda pops, one of my favorite pops, one of my favorite sodas. Notice there's a bunch of different words for that. Anyways, I asked my mom if she would buy me a can of Coke, and she said no, she wouldn't buy me a can of Coke. So we walked to the end of that aisle and we walked into the next aisle, and then I kind of walked backwards and I went back to the aisle that had the Coca-Cola, and then I took a can and I kind of crawled right onto the lower shelf of the grocery store because I was so little I could fit there. And I remember opening the can of pop and it went ka-ch. And then as it went ka-ch, I started to take a couple sips of the Coca-Cola, and I think I drank about half the can before my mom found me. My mom grabbed me and pulled me out from under that shelf, and she said, "You will never, ever do that again. Come with me." And she took me to the front of the store, and we apologized to the store owner. Then she made me buy the can of pop with my own money, and then we went home, and she took the can of pop and she dumped all of it down the sink. The entire can of pop she dumped down the sink. So I had to pay for the pop and she dumped it down the sink. I will never forget that lesson. That was a very important lesson for me. Anyways, I told you two stories. Notice, before I tell you which story was true, notice the format of the two stories. I like to start my little stories in English, and if you speak other languages, you do the same, by talking about when and where something happened. So in my stories, you knew that they happened when I was a little kid, and you knew that they happened at a store. So you knew the when and you knew the where. The next thing I did was introduce who the story was about. So the story was about me, but it was also about my mom. Then I described the what of the stories. In the first story, the what is that I snuck away from my mom, so that's what happened. I opened a bag of chips. In the second story, I snuck away from my mom. I opened a can of pop. I almost said bag of chips there. And then you kind of know how both stories end as well. So it's a great structure. As you are learning English, this is more than an English listening lesson. This is a lesson on how to tell a good story in English. Maybe write down a few stories in English of something that happened to you when you were younger, so that you're ready to tell those stories if you're ever in a social situation. Anyways, I should tell you which story was true, shouldn't I? Well, I told both stories, and I was trying to not give away any hints as to which story was true. So instead of telling two completely different stories, I told a story that was true and then a story where I just changed some of the details in the story. So here we go. The first story is a lie. The first story did not happen. I did not sneak away from my mom. I did not open a bag of potato chips. But the second story is definitely true, and I do remember that story very, very well. It happened, as I said, when I was a little kid. We were at the local little grocery store in our town, and I guess I was a rebellious little kid, and I didn't listen to my mom, and I went and I took a can of pop without paying, and I hid in the store, and I drank half of it. And I do remember my mom making me pay for it, and I remember her dumping it all down the sink at our house so that I would learn a valuable lesson. And I do remember apologizing to the store owner. So anyways, this was just a little English lesson to help you with some of your English listening. This was good English listening practice. But also remember that structure of the story. Talk about the when and where, talk about the who, talk about what happened, and tell people, when you tell a story, tell people how it ended. Anyways, I'm Bob the Canadian. This was just a quick little English lesson for you. I hope you are having a good week. And while you're here, why don't you stick around and watch another video? I would really appreciate it. Anyways, see you later. Live lesson this Friday morning, live lesson this Saturday evening. I hope to see you there.